Assalamu alaikum guys and welcome back to another video. It's Ibrahim Muslim and today I'm back with another video on Hackintosh. So this video is basically going to be on Clover Configurator and how to set Clover Configurator on your macOS, Catalina and older versions. So there's been so many changes in Clover Configurator since I made my last video. So I thought it would be great that I restart this Clover Configurator videos and let you know how to configure it and how to start with Hackintosh. So let's start with Clover Configurator. So I have divided the video in a lots of different parts, smaller parts, and this will be the first part. And in this part, I will tell you the basic component for a Hackintosh and how to start Hackintoshes. And if you have a Mac computer, then how you can use that Macintosh system to build a Hackintosh system on your PC hardware. So this is the part one and it's going to be a basic startup guide and knowing what area or which settings does what and what are the basic stuff you need to know before you start with Clover Configurator. So let's start. First of all, this is the basic home page for Clover Configurator. If you download the Clover Configurator, right now the version I am using is 5.7, and as far as I can remember, the last time I used was version 4, so it's been version 5.7 and it's almost going to get to 6. So let's start. This is the mount UEFI. So the mount UEFI is the mounting area from where you can mount your UEFI partition system. UEFI is extended firmware interface. The UEFI is basically the partition in which the BIOS of your Apple or Mac OS is stored. So when your system starts up, it boots up, it calls the BIOS or the UEFI system of your motherboard. I recommend you not to get MSI. It causes a lot of problem. So the best motherboard to go for Hackintosh are Gigabyte and then Asus. And so the number one step which occurs after you turn on your system is the UEFI calls a bootloader on your hard drives. So what it does on a Hackintosh system is when you turn on your system, your UEFI is itself a BIOS and it's a firmware which calls an operating system. So your UEFI boots up and then it calls another UEFI system which is Clover bootloader, and then the Clover bootloader calls the Mac OS to boot, because normal UEFI motherboard cannot call Mac OS to boot directly because will have its specific and locked up boot up system which only Clover can boot and no other motherboard can directly boot. So we are going to boot Clover bootloader from our UEFI motherboard. You can do a couple of editing in the Clover bootloader which will result in your Hackintosh or in your Mac OS operating system. So number one step is you click the mount button and then you go to the UEFI on APFS container. So these APFS containers started to appear after High Sierra, and in High Sierra I think they started to implement the APFS file system. So and in Catalina they divided it into two partitions. One is OSX data, which is my OSX main partition drive. Then there is a pre-boot recovery virtual box, and then this is the OSX. So you just have to find a relevant name and then you click mount and then you open. So here is the UEFI folder, and the UEFI folder contains lots of different things. Number one and the most important thing is the kex. Kex are basically what we call drivers in Windows. So they are different than drivers, but they technically do what drivers do. They tell your Mac OS how to operate a specific hardware. So right now if we zoom in, so this is a kex. So it can be called like a driver, but it's just a guidance to the Mac OS system how to run specific files. So it's not like the complete driver, but a reader manual for your macOS to run some specific hardware and which hardware does what. And in short, it's kind of a manual to a complete driver which is already present in macOS. So Apple APFS, this is required to turn on your audio from your motherboard. So Apple does not need any drivers for the audio, so they only need specific commands to turn on the audio drivers they already have in macOS. This is for your Ethernet. So this one is for Intel. There are a couple of different kex for Taurus and other killer Ethernet cards and other different Ethernet cards. This is the virtual SMC. So Apple have an SMC system which tells the bootloader or which tells the Mac OS which system you are using. It can be a MacBook, Mac Pro, it can be iMac Pro, and whatever it is, the SMC tells the Mac OS. So in our condition, we don't have any SMC in our motherboards. So we have to use a virtual SMC, which will basically fake it up to the Mac OS that this is this specific system and how to get through that procedure or the operating system requirements. And then this is whatever green. This is developed by some extremely kind people out there for the Hackintosh community, and whatever green have lots of fixes which would take like days to do cover up if it was not in whatever green, and Hackintosh was really hard without this and the Lilu kegs. So these both kegs basically fix up the graphics issue in AMD and Intel, Nvidia if you're using High Sierra or older. So these are very important. They got lots of patches. They can enable your AMD Vega cards, they can enable your RX cards, RX 400, 500, 300, and lots of different cards are enabled through this. And if this was not present, you have to manually patch, you have to write SSTT, you have to write DSTTs for all that crap. And Lilu does that as well. Lilu have some patches which helps CPU to boot up, which helps Intel graphics to boot up, and lots of different patches are there as well. Then the third and the most important is the USB inject all. So this is also developed by very kind developers and Hackintoshes out there. So this with a SSTT patch can enable all your USB 3, 3.1, Gen 1, Gen 2 and USB 2 ports on your motherboard. So this is also something that is faked up in Mac OS. Normally Apple don't have lots of USB ports on their system. They hardly have like 4 USB A type and like 2 or 4 USB C type. But in our normal condition, our PCs, it can go up to like 15 or 14 or different, like lots of different USB ports out there. So you have to manually add the ID and the code of those USB to enable them. So it's basically for USB, and without this your USB won't work. So these are the driver here, and the codec is also for audio. It helps audio to be enabled after the sleep, and the CPU friend is also for helping the CPU to understand how to work better. And then after going away from text area, we can find drivers. So these drivers are basically the drivers the Clover need itself to load the Mac OS. So these are not something which will affect the Mac OS itself, but these will literally affect how the Clover will handle Mac OS and how Clover will load the Mac OS. So these are very important to boot Mac OS itself. So starting from here, this is the APFS loader, which will, as it says, it will help to load the APFS file system drivers. And from here to here, these are for firewall. Then this is also an memory fix. This is for audio, this is for memory, this is for enabling the NVRAM, and also for iMessages and different kind of authentication which macOS required to give provided services, and lots of different stuff like iMessages, App Store, and FaceTime, and now the Apple TV, Apple Genius support, and iTunes Genius support. This is for firmware. And here this is for HFS file system loading, HFS plus. Without this you won't be able to boot into an HFS file system. Then this is for NTFS. Without this you won't be able to boot into Windows. Then NV Express is for loading the NVMe drives on your motherboard. This is a fix for your memory. And this is SMC helper, which will help virtual SMC to get the most out of your motherboard and your system to get the most compatible Hackintosh. Then here is the config.plst. So config.plst is what we control with Clover Configurator. And this config.plst holds what Clover will tell our Mac OS about our system hardware and system definition. In config.plst we have ACPI section. Here we can enable lots of different plugins and sleep and wake up and different patches and audio patch HDMI patch, Intel HD graphics patch, lots of different things. Then in the boot section, these are the commands that Clover will apply while booting Mac OS. So whatever you do will affect the boot up style. You can add -V for a verbose to see what's going on when the system boots up. You can use -X for going to the safe mode. You can use -S to going to a single mode while you boot up to Hackintosh. You can use NPCI for selecting specific graphic card. You can use slide O, you can use CPU 0, CPU S1, which will enable just one CPU core in your system. And there are a ton of different things which you can study, and I will try to explain in the next videos. Then here is the default boot volume. If you write the name of your drive here, your Clover will search for this drive and will boot to it right away without asking you which drive to boot. And then from here you can add the timer, how long the Clover will wait before it boots the drive. So it's very helpful if you want to have a fast boot up. Then the boot up graphics. Here you can also set the CPU devices. I'll tell about this in the next videos. Same is for the CPU. You can add a base frequency, bus frequency. Adding these can affect your performance. It can increase or decrease it. In devices, here you will add the audio code depending on your system. It can be 1, it can be 4, it can be 7, depending on which ALC your motherboard is using. Normally it's 1 for 1150. It can be 4 for 892, and it can be a lot of different settings. You can try from 1 to 13. So there are a lot of different stuff. Here you can inject USB ownership and stuff. I will let you know about that as well. Then here is the GUI. So this is the area where you select how the Clover will show its Clover boot up menu. So this menu is not this menu, it's the menu which will appear if you restart your system and wait for Clover to show up. And from there you can select you want to go to Windows or either you want to go to Mac OS. So that's the setting for the GUI, the graphical user interface of the Clover boot loader itself, and how the Clover bootloader will show up on your screen. Whether you want it to show on 1080p, you want to show in a 2K, or you want to show on a low resolution if your display is of a low resolution. Then here you can play a sync, which means you can play sound when the Clover boots up. You can do a lot of different settings here. And then we go to the graphics section. Graphics section is very important. So this is how the Clover will treat your graphics card. If you're having an Intel, if you're trying to boot from Intel HD graphics, inject Intel is very important. Without this, your Intel graphics won't work. If you're going to use AMD graphic card, you technically don't have to do anything here. The whatever green and lido.cax will handle almost 99% of that. Only you need to do is load which VBIOS, and then here you can add the name of your CPU, the model version, which CPU you're using, which generation of Intel CPU you're using. If I'm using an i9 9900K, I would rather go for this. If I'm using a KB Lake or an older version, I will select my config depending on that. And you can search, there are a lot of different CPU versions here available here. Then in kernel and kex patches, in like 2019 and 20, you don't need lots of patches to get the system to boot up. Before that, there were so many patches for audio, for USB, for graphics, for CRIM support on SSDs. A lot of different patches were required, but now due to our community growth and some extreme developers out there, it's reduced to almost none. But Apple RTC, Apple Intel CPU power management, and kernel panic support is very important. You have to enable these even on Intel CPUs. Then RT variables, I will hide mine because these are specific for your system, and these are required for iMessages to work. So ROM and MLB is very important, and it's required for iMessages to work, and you can get both of these out of from a real Mac, and your chances to get a working iMessages goes up to 100%. In SM BIOS, if you're using Intel 567 or Intel 678 generation and you're using a Vega GPU, I would recommend you to just use iMac Pro 11. It works best for almost all the generation of intels. If you're using a non-Vega card, then you can go in specific details and select the one which matches your system specification most accurately. In system parameter, you always have to inject text, inject system ID, and there is a custom UID which is also specific to mine. And then here are different options which include boot log. Here you can see if any error occurs if you try to change or modify something. Generate a config. The Clover will try to generate a custom config depending on the current state of your system. Then theme editor is basically used to edit the themes of Clover bootloader GUI, the one which will appear when you restart the system. Install and update Clover. From here you can download the latest Clover without any problem. Clover bootloader, not the Clover configurator. So right now an update is available. We can download and install drivers. In install drivers, these are the UEFI drivers, not the kex. So here you can download the latest one. You can see which new drivers are there, any update available. So this is very important as well. The green one shows that they are already present. Blank gray one tells it's not. NVRAM, you want to emulate NVRAM, you want to store it on system partition, you want to store it on EFI, and you want to mount your EFI partition on boot up, can be edited here. Hex converter can convert any hex in a different state. It is very useful if you're trying to patch. Then we have text mode. All the config is available as text here to enable some specific things which is not available in Clover Configurator, or your config.plst got corrupted, so you can edit it out here. In kex support, this is extremely helpful and it almost provides the latest drivers. Sometimes the latest drivers are not available here, latest kex are not available here. You can search internet for that, but almost all of the kex which are vital are now available right here in Clover Configurator, and it's very helpful. Clover cloner, so it can clone your whole Clover onto a drive or onto a EFI partition, and you won't be losing your Hackintosh anytime soon. So that's all for this video, guys. I hope you liked it. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you want more help, if you want my direct support, contact me on Patreon. And if you have any question, query, let me know in the comment section below. I will try my best to answer you guys as fast as possible. And if I don't, then I will probably reply on Patreon very fast. You can also go to my Facebook page and you can comment or ask questions there. I will try to answer there as well, but because of busy routine, I might be slower in replying, so don't mind that. And as always, thanks for watching. Hope you liked it, hope you enjoyed it, and until the very next video, please take care. Allah Hafiz.